The backup generator kicked to life in my driveway with its familiar rumble, and I checked my watch to note the time for my maintenance log when I heard the screech of tires followed by slamming car doors. I lived in Coral Springs, Florida, in a development called Paradise Meadows that promised luxury living with strict community standards. What they didn't advertise was the nightmare HOA that came with it. I'm Yates Ingram, a 38-year-old network security consultant who works from home, which meant having reliable power wasn't just convenient but essential for my livelihood. Turn that thing off right now. The voice pierced through the generator's steady hum before I even saw who was yelling. I walked around from my garage to find Debra Patterson, the HOA president, standing in my driveway with her phone already pressed to her ear. She was everything you'd expect from a stereotypical HOA busybody. Perfectly coiffed blonde hair with highlights that probably cost more than my monthly electric bill. Designer athleisure, where despite never setting foot in a gym, and an expression of perpetual offense at the world around her. "It's just a generator test, Debra," I called out, wiping my hands on a rag. "Required maintenance." She held up one finger to silence me while speaking into her phone. "Yes, officer, there's a massive disturbance in our quiet residential neighborhood. The noise is unbearable, and it's clearly violating our community noise ordinances." She paused, listening. "Yes, I'll stay on the line." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was actually calling the cops on me for testing my generator during the middle of the afternoon on a Tuesday. The unit had been running for maybe 5 minutes. "Debra, you cannot be serious right now," I said, walking closer. "It's 2 in the afternoon. There's construction happening 3 streets over that's 10 times louder than this." She ignored me completely, turning her back and continuing her conversation with whoever was on the other end. I stood there, genuinely baffled by the situation. This wasn't my first run-in with Debra and her reign of terror over Paradise Meadows, but it was definitely the most ridiculous. 2 months earlier, she'd sent me a violation notice because my mailbox had a small chip in the paint. Not rust, not damage, just a tiny chip that you'd have to get within 2 feet to even notice. Before that, it was about the height of my grass being a 1/4 inch too tall according to her measurements, even though the landscaping company I hired specifically followed HOA guidelines. The woman had made it her personal mission to make my life difficult, and I'd finally had enough. I pulled out my own phone and called my lawyer, Marcus Chen, who had kept on retainer specifically because of HOA issues. He'd handled my closing when I bought the house and warned me about the HOA then, but I dismissed his concerns. "Big mistake. Marcus, it's Yates. She's calling the cops on me for testing my generator. Your backup generator, the one you're required to test monthly." Marcus's voice carried a mix of disbelief and weary familiarity. "The very same. She's standing in my driveway right now on the phone with police dispatch. Don't turn it off. Let it run its full test cycle. I'll make some calls. This is actually going to work in our favor, Yates. Trust me." I trusted Marcus. He'd successfully sued 3 different HOAs in the past year alone for overreach, and had developed a reputation as the go-to attorney for homeowner rights in South Florida. If anyone could handle Debra Patterson, it was him. The generator continued its steady operation while Debra paced my driveway, shooting me venomous looks between her phone conversations. I noticed a few neighbors had come out to see what the commotion was about. Old Mr. Harrison from across the street gave me a sympathetic wave. He'd been on the receiving end of Debra's wrath more times than he could count. Within 15 minutes, a Coral Springs police cruiser pulled up. Officer Rodriguez stepped out, a stocky man in his 40s who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Before he could even approach, Debra practically ran up to him. "Officer, thank goodness you're here. This noise has been going on for 20 minutes now, and it's completely unacceptable. Our HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions clearly state that excessive noise is prohibited, and generators specifically require written approval before installation or operation." Officer Rodriguez held up his hand. "Madam, let me just assess the situation first." He walked over to where I stood by the garage. "Sir, I'm Officer Rodriguez. Can you tell me what's going on?" "I'm performing required monthly maintenance on my backup generator, officer. I'm a network security consultant and I work from home. When Hurricane Ian caused those extended power outages 2 years ago, I lost a week of work and nearly lost a major client. I had this generator professionally installed last year with all the proper permits from the county." "How long has it been running?" I checked my watch. "About 18 minutes. I run a 30-minute test cycle on the first Tuesday of every month, always between noon and 3 p.m. to minimize any potential disturbance." Rodriguez nodded slowly, making notes. "And you said you have permits?" "Yes, sir, from Broward County." "The installation was inspected and approved. The unit meets all noise ordinances for residential areas, and monthly testing is actually required by fire code for backup power systems." Debra had followed the officer over. "That's irrelevant. Our HOA has stricter standards than county code, and Mr. Ingram never received approval from the Architectural Review Committee before installing this monstrosity." "I submitted my application 14 months ago," I said, pulling out my phone to access my files. "I have the certified mail receipt right here showing it was delivered to the HOA management office. According to your own bylaws, if the committee doesn't respond within 45 days, the application is automatically approved." Debra's face flushed red. "That's not how it works. Silence doesn't equal consent." "Actually, madam, that's exactly what their bylaws state if he's reading them correctly," Officer Rodriguez said. "And regarding the noise, I've been standing here for 5 minutes now, and while I can hear the generator, it's well within acceptable daytime noise levels. I can hear traffic from University Drive louder than this unit. So you're not going to do anything?" Debra's voice had taken on a shrill quality. "There's nothing to do, madam. He's not violating any laws or ordinances. If you have an issue with HOA rules, that's a civil matter between homeowners and the association." Rodriguez turned back to me. "Sir, you're all good. Just keep doing what you're doing." After the officer left, Debra stood in my driveway for another moment, visibly fuming. "This isn't over, Yates. Not by a long shot. You'll be receiving violation notices, and we will fine you for every single infraction until you comply with our standards." "Bring it on, Debra. My lawyer's already involved." She stomped back to her white Mercedes SUV and peeled out of my driveway with enough force to leave rubber marks on the street. The generator completed its test cycle, and I shut it down, logging the maintenance in my records as always. Marcus called me back an hour later. "I talked to a buddy of mine at County Code Enforcement. Want to know something interesting? Always. Your HOA never actually filed your CC and Articus with the county clerk. They're supposed to file amendments and new rules within 30 days of approval, but there's no record of any filing in the past 6 years. That means a lot of their recent rule changes, including the ones about generator installations requiring committee approval, aren't actually enforceable." "You're kidding." "Nope. And it gets better. I did some digging into the HOA's financial records, which are supposed to be available to all homeowners. Debra's been stonewalling people who ask to see them, which violates Florida Statute 720. I'm thinking we might want to organize a few of your neighbors and really dig into what's going on with your HOA. Count me in. What do you need? Over the next week, Marcus and I connected with 7 other homeowners in Paradise Meadows who'd had similar issues with Debra and the HOA board. There was Jennifer Martinez, a single mother who'd received a violation for her children's chalk drawings on her own driveway. Robert Chen, no relation to Marcus, had been fined $5,000 for replacing his roof shingles with a color that was supposedly not approved, even though it was the exact same shade as 12 other houses in the development. Patricia Nguyen had been threatened with legal action because her teenage son's car had a small dent in the rear bumper, and the HOA claimed it was an eyesore that violated their standards for vehicles parked in driveways. We met at my house on a Saturday morning, and Marcus laid out what he'd discovered. Okay, folks, this is bigger than individual harassment. I was able to obtain some financial records through a public records request, since your HOA receives funds that flow through the county for common area maintenance. What I found is concerning. He spread out several documents on my dining room table. Your HOA collects approximately $45,000 monthly in dues from the 300 homes in this development. That's $540,000 annually. The budget that was presented at last year's annual meeting showed expenses of $530,000, leaving a small surplus for the reserve fund. That sounds normal, Robert said. It would be, except I found invoices from several vendors that don't match up. For example, the HOA supposedly paid a landscaping company called Paradise Property Services $90,000 last year. I looked up Paradise Property Services. It's registered to a Debra Patterson at her residential address in Fort Lauderdale. The room went silent. She created a fake company, Jennifer asked. It appears so, and that's not all. There's also Summit Pool Maintenance, another $40,000, registered to Craig Patterson, her husband. Prestige Pressure Washing, $30,000, registered to her sister Linda Kozlowski. I found at least 6 different companies, all registered to her or immediate family members, all billing the HOA for services that either were never performed or were vastly overcharged. Patricia leaned forward. How much are we talking total? Conservative estimate. She's stolen at least $250,000 from the HOA over the past 3 years. Possibly more if this goes back further, but I can only access 3 years of records right now. That's embezzlement, I said. That's a serious crime. It absolutely is. And there's more. The violation fines she's been levying. Those are supposed to go into the HOA general fund, but I can't find any record of fine payments in the financial statements. My theory is she's been pocketing those too. Jennifer shook her head in disbelief. So what do? We call the state attorney's office. This is criminal fraud. But first, I want to file an emergency motion with the circuit court to get access to all HOA records and to freeze the HOA's bank accounts. We need to stop the bleeding before she realizes we're onto her and tries to cover her tracks. Marcus moved quickly. By Monday afternoon, he'd filed the motion and served notice to Debra and the other 2 board members, Carol Henderson and William Porter, both of whom seemed to be Debra's puppets who rubber-stamped whatever she wanted. Tuesday morning, my doorbell rang at 7 a.m. I opened it to find Debra standing there with a stack of papers. She thrust them at me without a word, then turned and left. I looked down at the documents, violation notices, 12 of them. Each violation carried a fine of $100 per day until corrected, starting immediately. According to her calculations, I already owed $4,800. I took pictures of every page and sent them to Marcus, who called me within minutes. This is perfect. Perfect. She's trying to fine me almost $5,000, Marcus. And she just handed us evidence of retaliation and harassment. Don't you see? She knows we're investigating her, and instead of backing off, she's doubling down. This shows intent and malice. Plus, half of these violations are completely fabricated. I was at your house on Saturday. Your grass was perfectly maintained. This is going to make our case even stronger. The emergency hearing was scheduled for Thursday. Marcus worked around the clock preparing our case, and I spent those 2 days documenting everything in my yard, taking hundreds of photos and measurements to disprove every single one of Debra's claimed violations. Thursday morning arrived, and I met Marcus at the Broward County Courthouse. The hearing was in front of Judge Margaret O'Sullivan, a no-nonsense jurist with a reputation for being fair but tough. Debra arrived with an attorney, some guy in an expensive suit named Richard Blackwell, who apparently specialized in HOA law. Judge O'Sullivan reviewed the filings. Mr. Chen, you filed an emergency motion for access to HOA records and to freeze association accounts. That's a serious request. What's your basis? Marcus stood. Your Honor, we have evidence of systematic fraud and embezzlement by the HOA president. Our forensic review of available records shows at least $250,000 in fraudulent payments to shell companies owned by Mrs. Patterson and her family members. We believe she's currently attempting to hide assets and retaliate against homeowners who are questioning her management. That's a serious accusation, Counselor. Do you have documentation? Yes, Your Honor. Marcus presented his findings, walking the judge through the invoices, company registrations, and financial discrepancies. He also presented my stack of violation notices from Tuesday morning. Mrs. Patterson issued these violations to my client 2 days after we served notice of this investigation. The timing is not coincidental. Several of these violations are demonstrably false. For example, she claims his grass height violates HOA standards, but photographic evidence from the day the notice was issued shows full compliance. This is clear retaliation. Blackwell stood up. Your Honor, Mrs. Patterson has been an exemplary HOA president. These accusations are coming from a disgruntled homeowner who refuses to follow community rules. Mr. Ingram has been a problem resident since he moved in, constantly pushing boundaries and causing disturbances. What kind of disturbances? Judge O'Sullivan asked. He operates loud machinery during residential hours. He's confrontational with the board, and he's now organized this witch hunt because he's been held accountable for his violations. The loud machinery is a backup generator that's required by code to be tested monthly, Marcus interjected. Mr. Ingram works from home as a network security consultant and needs reliable power. The generator was professionally installed with proper county permits, and monthly testing is mandated by Florida Fire Prevention Code Section 633. Mrs. Patterson actually called the police on him for conducting a required safety test in full compliance with the law. Judge O'Sullivan's eyebrows raised. She called the police on him for testing a generator. Yes, Your Honor. The responding officer confirmed Mr. Ingram was not violating any ordinances, but Mrs. Patterson then issued additional violations and continues to harass him about the generator. The judge looked at Debra. Mrs. Patterson, did you call the police on Mr. Ingram for testing a backup generator? Debra stood, her lawyer putting a hand on her arm to stop her, but she shrugged it off. That generator is excessively loud and violates our community standards. Just because the county allows something doesn't mean our HOA has to permit it. We have the right to maintain higher standards. Higher than the fire code, the judge asked. We have the right to enforce our rules. What about these shell companies, Mrs. Patterson? Paradise Property Services, Summit Pool Maintenance, and the others. Those are registered to you and your family members, correct? Blackwell stood quickly. Your Honor, my client declines to answer questions about her business interests without proper counsel for those matters. This is turning into a fishing expedition. Judge O'Sullivan looked unimpressed. Counselor, your client is the president of an HOA that's being accused of fraud. These questions are directly relevant. She reviewed the documents again, taking several minutes to read through the details Marcus had provided. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm granting the motion for full access to all HOA records going back 7 years. Mrs. Patterson, you and the board are ordered to provide complete and unredacted financial records, meeting minutes, vendor contracts, and all related documentation within 10 days. I'm also freezing all HOA accounts except for an operating account with a balance of $20,000 for essential expenses. Any expenditure over $500 requires court approval until further notice. Blackwell started to object, but the judge cut him off. I'm also referring this matter to the state attorney's office for investigation of potential criminal fraud. Mrs. Patterson, you should retain criminal counsel. Debra's face went pale. This is outrageous. I've done nothing wrong. Then the investigation will clear you. But the evidence presented today is concerning enough to warrant a full review. As for Mr. Ingram's violations, those are suspended pending resolution of this matter. If even one of those violations is found to be retaliatory or false, Mrs. Patterson, you may face additional consequences. She banged her gavel. We're adjourned. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Marcus was practically glowing. That went better than I could have hoped. O'Sullivan is known for being thorough. If there's dirt to find, she'll make sure it's found. Over the next 2 weeks, Debra's world began to crumble. The court-appointed forensic accountant uncovered even more fraud than Marcus had initially found. The total was closer to $400,000 over 5 years. She'd been systematically billing the HOA for services never rendered, inflating costs on legitimate work, and pocketing violation fines without reporting them. The state attorney's office opened a formal criminal investigation. Agents showed up at Debra's house with a warrant, seizing computers, documents, and financial records. Her husband Craig and sister Linda were also implicated in the scheme. But Debra wasn't going down without a fight, and her desperation made her dangerous. I was testing my generator again on the first Tuesday of the following month, as required, when I heard screaming from my front yard. I rushed around to find Debra in my driveway holding a baseball bat. "You ruined everything," she screamed. "I built this community. I made it what it is. And you destroyed it because you couldn't follow simple rules." Debra put the bat down. "You're not thinking clearly. You're going to drop these charges. You're going to tell the court you made a mistake. You're going to fix this." She advanced toward me, raising the bat. I backed toward my garage. "Debra, there are no charges for me to drop. The state attorney brought those charges. This is way beyond me now. You started this. You and your damn generator and your attitude and your lawyer." She swung the bat at my mailbox, denting it severely. "See? Now you have a real violation. Now you actually broke a rule." I pulled out my phone and dialed 911, but she saw me and lunged forward, swinging the bat at my hand. I dodged and she missed, but the momentum carried her forward. She stumbled on the edge of my driveway and fell hard onto the concrete, the bat clattering away. "Are you okay?" I asked, instinctively moving to help her. "Get away from me," she shrieked, scrambling backward. "Don't touch me. I'll say you assaulted me. I'll say you attacked me." This was insane. I backed up, keeping my distance, and completed my 911 call. The operator could hear Debra's continued screaming and sent units immediately. Officer Rodriguez arrived first, responding to the call faster since he was already in the area. When he saw it was me and Debra again, he sighed deeply. "Mr. Ingram, Mrs. Patterson, what's the situation?" She came to my property with a baseball bat, threatened me, damaged my mailbox, then fell when she tried to swing at my phone, I said calmly. "That's a lie." Debra was still on the ground. "He attacked me. He pushed me down. My wrist is broken. I want him arrested." Rodriguez looked at my garage where the camera was prominently visible. "You have security footage, multiple angles. The generator test recording is automatic. Everything from the last 45 minutes is saved." "No, the cameras are illegal. He's recording public space without permission. That's a crime." Debra was grasping at straws. "Madam, he's recording his own property. That's completely legal." Rodriguez called for backup and an ambulance for Debra, then asked to review my footage. We watched it together in my garage on my laptop. The video clearly showed Debra arriving with the bat, screaming threats, damaging my mailbox, then falling after her swing at my phone. At no point did I touch her or do anything aggressive. 2 more officers arrived along with paramedics. Rodriguez spoke with them privately, and I heard him say something about assault with a deadly weapon and property damage. The paramedics examined Debra, who insisted her wrist was broken and that I'd pushed her, despite the video evidence showing otherwise. Her wrist was swollen, possibly sprained from the fall, and they recommended she go to the hospital for X-rays. "Mrs. Patterson, I'm placing you under arrest for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon and criminal mischief," Rodriguez said. "You have the right to remain silent." "This is insane. I'm the victim here. He destroyed my life." Debra continued screaming even as they handcuffed her and placed her in the patrol car. After they left, I stood in my driveway looking at my dented mailbox, barely able to process what had just happened. My neighbor, Mr. Harrison, came over. "You all right, son?" "Yeah, just stunned." I never thought she'd go that far. Desperate people do desperate things. She knows the walls are closing in. Did you hear they're foreclosing on her house? Turns out she hasn't paid her mortgage in 8 months, spent all that stolen money on who knows what. The criminal case against Debra moved forward on multiple fronts. The assault charges from the bat incident were just the beginning. The state attorney's investigation uncovered extensive fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, and tax evasion. Craig and Linda were also charged as co-conspirators in the fraud scheme. Marcus filed a class action lawsuit on behalf of all the homeowners in Paradise Meadows against Debra, Craig, Linda, and their various shell companies, seeking return of all stolen funds plus damages. We also sued to dissolve the current board and implement oversight reforms. The discovery process revealed even more shocking details. Debra had been embezzling from HOAs for over a decade. Paradise Meadows wasn't her first rodeo. She'd previously been on the board of 2 other HOAs in South Florida, both of which she'd left under suspicious circumstances. Those communities were now also investigating their financials from her tenure. The trial started 6 months later. I took a day off work to attend, wanting to see how this would finally end. The prosecution laid out a compelling case with forensic accountants, bank records, and testimony from homeowners who'd been harassed and fined unfairly when they questioned Debra's management. The defense tried to argue that Debra had poor record-keeping skills and wasn't intentionally committing fraud, just making bookkeeping errors. But the evidence of shell companies registered to her family members, fake invoices with fabricated work descriptions, and systematic concealment of her actions proved otherwise. The bat incident didn't help her case either, showing a pattern of aggression and instability when confronted. After 4 days of testimony, the jury deliberated for only 3 hours before returning with guilty verdicts on all counts. 18 counts of fraud, 8 counts of embezzlement, 4 counts of money laundering, and 3 counts of tax evasion. The assault charges had been handled in a separate trial where she'd already been convicted. Sentencing came 2 months later. I attended that as well, as did many of my neighbors. The judge was not lenient. "Mrs. Patterson, you were entrusted with the financial well-being of a community. You betrayed that trust systematically and deliberately over many years. You stole from families, from retirees on fixed incomes, from single parents struggling to make ends meet. When confronted with your crimes, you doubled down with harassment and intimidation. You showed no remorse, only anger at being caught. I'm sentencing you to 12 years in federal prison for the financial crimes, with an additional 3 years for the assault charges to be served consecutively. You'll also pay full restitution of $427,000 to Paradise Meadows HOA, plus penalties and interest." Debra broke down sobbing, her attorney putting an arm around her shoulders as she was led away. Craig and Linda received shorter sentences, 5 years and 3 years respectively, for their roles in the fraud. The civil lawsuit resulted in a judgment that stripped them of nearly all their assets. Their house, cars, and investments were seized and liquidated to pay restitution to the HOA. It wasn't enough to cover everything they'd stolen, but it was a start. With Debra gone, Paradise Meadows needed new leadership. Marcus helped us organize a special election for the board. The campaign was contentious, with several candidates arguing over what direction the HOA should take. One faction wanted to maintain strict rules and regulations, while others, myself included, advocated for a more reasonable approach focused on maintaining property values without petty harassment of homeowners. I ended up running for the board, not because I wanted the power or responsibility, but because I wanted to make sure we never ended up with another Debra Patterson situation. The election was close, but I won a seat along with Mr. Harrison and Patricia Nguyen. Jennifer Martinez became our new president, and Robert Chen took the role of treasurer with a mandate to implement strict financial oversight. Our first order of business was a complete overhaul of the HOA's rules and enforcement procedures. We eliminated dozens of petty regulations that existed only to give busybodies something to complain about. We established clear, objective standards for violations and created an appeals process so homeowners had recourse if they felt they were being treated unfairly. We also implemented financial controls. All vendor contracts now required competitive bidding with at least 3 quotes. Payments over $1,000 needed approval from 2 board members. Monthly financial statements were posted online for all homeowners to review. We hired an independent accounting firm to conduct annual audits. The generator issue that started everything became a focal point of our reforms. We established clear guidelines that backup generators were permitted as long as they met county code requirements and were tested only during reasonable daytime hours. We even encouraged homeowners to consider installing them, given Florida's hurricane vulnerability. Marcus helped us rewrite the CC and Articus to focus on genuine property maintenance and community standards rather than arbitrary enforcement. We filed everything properly with the county clerk this time, ensuring our rules were legally enforceable but fair. 6 months into the new board's tenure, we held a community meeting to discuss our progress and get feedback from residents. The turnout was impressive, over 100 homeowners showing up, many of whom had never attended an HOA meeting before. Jennifer opened the meeting. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. I know many of you lost faith in this HOA under previous leadership. We're working hard to rebuild that trust. Tonight, we want to hear from you about what's working, what isn't, and what you want to see from your HOA going forward." The comments were overwhelmingly positive. People appreciated the transparency, the reasonable enforcement of rules, and the end of harassment over trivial matters. Several homeowners shared stories of past issues with Debra that we'd never heard before. One elderly couple had been fined repeatedly for having a bench in their front yard, because Debra claimed it was an unapproved structure, even though the bench was a memorial to their deceased son and had been there for years. Another family had been threatened with legal action because their daughter's service dog played in the backyard, and Debra claimed the barking violated noise rules, despite the dog being remarkably quiet. We also received constructive criticism. Some felt we'd gone too far in the other direction, and that certain aesthetic standards should be maintained. Others wanted more community events and better use of common areas. We took notes on everything and committed to considering all feedback. One homeowner, a man named David who lived 3 streets over, raised his hand. "I just want to thank Yates specifically. If you hadn't stood up to Debra over that generator test, we might never have uncovered what she was doing. You could have just backed down, but you fought. That took courage." The room erupted in applause. I felt my face flush with embarrassment. I just wanted to test my generator legally. Marcus did all the heavy lifting. "You started it, though," Patricia said. "You decided enough was enough. That matters." After the meeting, several people came up to shake my hand and share their own stories. It struck me how much damage one person's petty tyranny could do to an entire community, and how long people would tolerate it out of fear or resignation. The legal aftermath continued for another year. Debra's appeals were denied at every level. She maintained her innocence, claiming she was a scapegoat and victim of a conspiracy by ungrateful homeowners. Her family stood by her initially, but as more evidence came out and their own legal troubles mounted, those relationships fractured. Craig divorced her while she was in prison. Linda stopped taking her calls. The insurance company that bonded the HOA paid out a significant portion of what was stolen, which helped stabilize our finances. We used the recovered funds to address deferred maintenance that Debra had neglected while siphoning money. The community pool was resurfaced, common area landscaping was upgraded, and we finally replaced the entrance gate system that had been broken for 2 years. Paradise Meadows slowly transformed from a place people dreaded dealing with into an actual community. We organized social events, a monthly food truck night in the common area, holiday decorations contests where everyone who participated got a small prize rather than competing, and a neighborhood watch program that focused on actual safety rather than code enforcement. My generator continued its monthly test cycles without incident. In fact, after Hurricane Elsa caused a 3-day power outage the following September, 5 other homeowners installed their own backup generators. When someone complained about the noise during testing, the board quickly explained that monthly testing was required by law and encouraged the complaining resident to consider getting their own generator for protection. 2 years after the initial generator incident that started everything, I was in my home office finishing up a project when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find a young woman in her 20s holding a notebook. "Mr. Ingram, I'm Ashley Torres from the Sun Sentinel. I'm doing a follow-up story on HOA reform in South Florida, and your situation with Paradise Meadows has become sort of the poster child for homeowner rights. Would you be willing to talk to me? I invited her in and spent an hour recounting the whole saga. She'd already interviewed Marcus, several other board members, and even spoken with Debra's lawyer. The article ran the following Sunday with the headline, "How One Man's Generator Test Brought Down an HOA Tyrant and Sparked Reform." The piece was thorough and fair, detailing not just what happened in Paradise Meadows, but using our situation as a jumping-off point to discuss broader issues with HOA governance in Florida. It quoted legislators who were proposing new laws to increase oversight and transparency requirements for HOAs. It featured other homeowners from around the state who'd experienced similar issues. The article generated significant response. I received emails and calls from people all over the country facing their own HOA nightmares, looking for advice on how to fight back. I referred them all to Marcus, who was now focusing his practice almost exclusively on HOA law and homeowner rights. 3 years after Debra's conviction, the Florida legislature passed the Homeowner Protection and HOA Reform Act, which was directly influenced by cases like ours. The law required regular independent audits for HOAs over a certain size, established clear procedures for challenging violations, limited the types of fines HOAs could impose, protected homeowners' rights to install backup generators and other safety equipment, and created a state-level office to investigate complaints about HOA mismanagement. The law wasn't perfect, and HOA abuse certainly didn't disappear overnight, but it was a step in the right direction. Governor DeSantis signed it at a ceremony in Tallahassee, and I was invited to attend along with several other homeowners whose cases had highlighted the need for reform. At the ceremony, I met a couple from Jacksonville who'd been fined $12,000 because their adult son with autism liked to line up toy cars in their driveway, which the HOA claimed was unsightly. Another man from Tampa had been threatened with foreclosure over unpaid fines for having a vegetable garden in his backyard that the HOA claimed violated aesthetic standards. A woman from Orlando had been harassed for months because she flew an American flag that was supposedly too large, even though federal law protected her right to display it. Each story reinforced how widespread the problem was, and how much one person with unchecked power could damage people's lives over the most trivial matters. Marcus spoke at the ceremony as well, representing the legal community that had fought for these reforms. HOAs serve an important purpose in maintaining communities and protecting property values. But too often, they become vehicles for petty tyrants to harass their neighbors and, in some cases, commit fraud. This law doesn't destroy HOAs. It simply ensures they operate fairly, transparently, and within reasonable bounds. It protects homeowners while still allowing communities to maintain standards. After the ceremony, I drove back to Coral Springs thinking about how much had changed since that Tuesday afternoon when I'd started a simple generator test. If someone had told me that routine maintenance would lead to uncovering fraud, criminal convictions, civil lawsuits, my election to the HOA board, and eventually state legislation, I would have thought they were insane. But that's exactly what happened, all because I refused to be bullied and had the resources to fight back. How many people didn't have those resources? How many just paid unfair fines or stopped fighting because the cost and stress weren't worth it? Those questions stuck with me. I started volunteering with a nonprofit that Marcus had founded called the Homeowner Defense Alliance. We provided free legal consultations to people dealing with HOA issues and helped connect them with attorneys who could take their cases. We also educated homeowners about their rights and helped them organize to challenge unfair HOA practices. The work was rewarding, but also frustrating. For every victory, there were dozens of situations where homeowners were stuck with unreasonable HOAs, but didn't have clear legal violations to challenge or couldn't afford the legal fees to fight. The new state law helped, but there was still a long way to go. Paradise Meadows continued to thrive under new leadership. Property values actually increased once word spread that we were a reasonable HOA that didn't harass residents. People wanted to live in a community where they wouldn't be fined for having their trash visible for 5 minutes past the allowable time, or receive violation notices because their house numbers were mounted a quarter-inch too low. We maintained standards. We enforced rules about not parking junk cars in driveways or letting properties fall into disrepair. But we did it reasonably, with warnings and working with homeowners to resolve issues rather than immediately levying fines. Shockingly, when you treated people like adults and partners rather than subjects, they generally responded positively. 4 years after everything started, I was testing my generator on a Tuesday afternoon in February when my doorbell rang. For a split second, I had a flashback to Debra's screaming face, but I shook it off and answered. It was a young family who just moved in 2 streets over. The husband introduced himself as Tom and his wife Sarah. "We just wanted to introduce ourselves and thank you. We heard about everything that happened here, and that's actually why we chose this community. We were living in a neighborhood with an insane HOA that made our lives miserable. When our realtor told us about Paradise Meadows and what you did to reform it, we knew this was where we wanted to be." "Well, welcome to the neighborhood. I hope you'll be happy here." "We already are. And actually, we wanted to ask about backup generators. We've been thinking about getting one, and we heard you're the guy to talk to." I spent 20 minutes walking them through the process, explaining the requirements, recommending the installer I'd used, and answering their questions about operation and maintenance. As they left, I thought about how different this interaction was from my early encounters with Debra. Instead of a homeowner living in fear of their HOA, these were people who'd actively sought out our community because of how we operated. That evening, I sat on my back patio with a beer, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood. Kids playing in someone's yard. A lawnmower running a few houses down. Normal, peaceful suburban sounds. My generator sat in the side yard, a silent sentinel ready to provide power when needed, tested monthly as required by code without anyone calling the police or threatening me with fines. It seemed almost surreal that such a simple thing, performing legally required maintenance on safety equipment, had set off such a chain of events. But I'd learned that standing up to bullies, even petty ones in positions of limited power, mattered. Evil didn't always come in the form of grand villains committing terrible crimes. Sometimes it was just someone like Debra Patterson, abusing a small amount of authority to harass people and enrich herself, counting on the fact that most people wouldn't fight back. I'd fought back. And with Marcus's help and the support of my neighbors, we'd won. Not just for Paradise Meadows, but in a small way, for homeowners across the state. The reforms we'd helped inspire wouldn't solve every problem, but they'd make it harder for the next Debra Patterson to victimize people unchecked. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Dinner next week. I've got a new case I want to tell you about. HOA in Boca Raton, similar pattern to what Debra did, might need you to testify about what you experienced." I texted back confirmation. The fight continued, but at least now we knew how to win. The sun set over Paradise Meadows, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. I finished my beer and went inside, grateful for a boring, peaceful evening in my home without anyone threatening to fine me or call the police over manufactured violations. 5 years later, I was still on the HOA board, having been re-elected twice. Jennifer remained president, and together we'd built something I was genuinely proud of. Paradise Meadows had become a model that other HOAs studied when they wanted to reform their own practices. Debra was still in prison with another 7 years left on her sentence. I didn't think about her much anymore. She'd become a cautionary tale rather than an active presence in my life. The insurance settlement and asset seizures had recovered most of what she'd stolen, and our HOA's finances were stable and transparent. The generator incident had faded into community legend. The story new residents heard about how our HOA had been transformed. Some details got embellished in the retelling. I'd heard versions where Debra had tried to physically attack the generator with a sledgehammer, where the police had arrested her during the initial generator test, and where I'd hired a team of investigators to bring her down. The truth was more mundane but also more important. I'd simply refused to be pushed around, and I'd had the resources and support to stand my ground. On the first Tuesday of each month, I still tested my generator. 30 minutes between noon and 3 p.m., logged and documented. The steady hum was familiar now, almost comforting. A reminder that some things in life are exactly what they appear to be. Necessary maintenance, required by code, protecting my home and livelihood. And if anyone ever called the cops on me for it again, I had 5 years of documentation, state law on my side, and a community that understood the importance of standing together against unreasonable authority. The generator shut down at the end of its test cycle, and I logged the maintenance in my records. Another successful test. Another month of knowing that if a hurricane knocked out power for days or weeks, I could keep working, keep the refrigerator running, keep my home safe and comfortable. As I headed back inside, Mr. Harrison waved from across the street. "Generator day," he called out cheerfully. "All good," I called back. Just another Tuesday afternoon in Paradise Meadows, where we'd learned that standing up for what's right, even over something as simple as a generator test, could change everything.